Why? Why? Why are reporters still acting surprised that Donald Trump is driving the United States towards bankruptcy? I mean, there's an argument here, but seriously, this is what I want to talk about now. Why? This is a man. Let me paint the picture for you here, okay? This is a man whose business acumen is so particular, or maybe the word we want to use is peculiar. This is a man who has bankrupted casinos. Casinos. Think about that for just a second. A casino is a business where the mathematics of it are purposely designed so that the house always wins. Law of large numbers are involved in that. You may have heard of that. Over time, the law of large numbers dictates, well, without getting into the mechanics of it, that the house always wins. But somehow, he managed to bankrupt not one, not two, not three, but four of them. So when I hear reporters or even ordinary people acting astonished that the deficits are exploding, that the debt is climbing, that the economic chaos is following in its wake, I don't ask what's happening. I ask a different question. Why are you surprised? Because what we're looking at is not an isolated event. It's a pattern. And one of the most important lessons history teaches us is people who refuse to recognize, who insist on not recognizing patterns, are condemned to be shocked by outcomes that were entirely predictable. And today we're going to talk about those patterns. Today we're going to talk about Donald Trump on the show. And this is Politics by Jake.
This is Politics by Jake. Most commentators merely report events. Jake decodes and reveals the hidden systems beneath the headlines. He exposes the enduring, sometimes generational patterns that govern history, politics, economics, and human behavior. Jake names the unnamed. He brings into focus the things that we're hiding, sometimes even in plain sight. And now, here's Jake.
All right, welcome to the show, and this is Politics by Jake. Not Politics by Jake. We talk about systems, we talk about structures, we talk about political situations, political problems of long standing from the standpoint of structures and institutions, because I don't think, and I say this to my audience respectfully, I don't think you understand them. I think that this is only natural. I think that we are all so compelled with the idea of keeping our nostrils above the economic waterline that we can't pay attention to these kinds of things. And I think the mass media helps. You hear me often talk about the corrupt, controlled, cynical, cacophonous. I change out adjectives all the time on this. Media, corrupt, controlled corporate media. I don't want to say that this is something that was always planned, but what do you think it has devolved to? The argument is that it has devolved. And if it has devolved, what has it devolved to? It's devolved to something distracting. Something where you don't hear explained. I was talking to members of my production staff about that, and we're going to be doing something back. I'll deviate a little bit. There's a book by Sorkin on the 2008 crash. There's a book by Galbraith, Kenneth Galbraith, on the 1929 crash. It never talks about it. It talks about all the window dressing. It talks about what was involved, but it never gets to the point. It never names names, and it never names intentions, and it never states the reason why people do this. And that's what it is that I like to talk about, because you need to know, because we are taught, we are propagandized in this society from the very moment that we can begin to understand things. We get a version of events. It's a sanitized version. It doesn't tell you the darkness, and people can go along for their entire lives unaware of the darkness in people. Oh, they may be aware that I don't like this person because he's this, and I don't like this person that because he has these attitudes, but it's different than that. I talk about, and in fact, I'm probably presaging something I'm going to talk about on the show today. I talk about the difficulty, especially that Americans have, the great difficulty that they have in understanding the concept of class and how important this is to understand. Why? Well, because America is the great egalitarian society. And there's very much of a tendency, and it is played into by the cynical, corrupt, controlled, laconic corporate media. There's something that was not alliterative. I began with an L. It's very much controlled by them that we're all Americans. We're all Americans. We're raised with this idea. We're all Americans. None of us is any different or any better. Oh, no. There are people who are different, and they're different because they think they are different, and they gravitate to other people who think that they are also different too, and they create a class. And it is those people, I would argue, that are willing to inflict upon this country and on the world, yes, on the world, these kinds of calamities that lead to blood and horror and sorrow and depredation and rape and plunder and pillage. And, I'm talking about, I'm not merely saying rape in the sexual violence term. I'm talking about economic rape, governmental rape, political rape. So that's what we talk about on the show. And today, we're going to talk about some of those patterns. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. We're going to talk about why so many intelligent people continue to be surprised by things that should surprise no one. Surprise no one. And then we're going to do something the corporate media almost never does. We're going to go behind the personalities, look at the institution. This is what I said, because I firmly believe it's not like I have people that I watch on social media, and they have a lot of followers, and I could describe them, but I appreciate what they do. It's just that they're different. I was talking with my production staff the other day, and I was saying that, this is like apples and oranges, but really the difference between what I do on this show and what they do, where they garner hundreds of thousands of followers to them, it's more like apples and rutabagas, or, apples and leeks, or something like that. The phylogenetic thing, is not, there's nothing happening there. You understand what I mean? But I feel that but I appreciate them, and I appreciate what they do. But if you understand, and this is my thing, if you understand the institutions, you understand the future. I'm glad you're with us. If you're joining us for the first time, this program is built on a very simple idea. The news tells you what happened. History tells you why. And if all you ever hear, like I say, is what happened, you'll spend the rest of your life reacting to events instead of understanding them. So every week, I try to step back from the headlines, ask the deeper question and look for the larger pattern. Sometimes that takes us into economics. Sometimes it takes us into constitutional law. Sometimes it takes us into history. Sometimes it takes us into political psychology. But wherever we go, and this is to follow up on what I was saying before, wherever we go, the goal is the same: to understand not just today's story, but the forces that produced it. So let's thus having said, and welcome, by the way, to 2026, and welcome to the fight. We have an absolutely positively existential election coming up that the mass-controlled, corporate, cynical, corrupt media is trying to portray more or less. I'm not saying it's 100,000%, but more or less just like business as usual, normal election. But what I would portray it as is an election that has enormous consequences with regard to the way the United States continues, or if it continues at all. Does it continue as a democracy? Does it continue as an oligarchy with democratic aspects to it, which is what you could argue ancient Rome was like, very much, even in the Republic days, it was like that. Or does it become a total oligarchy? Is there corporate capture of the United States? These are all the things, and there's just no question that this November election is existential. So anyway, we welcome you to the fight. We're glad that you're here. And so let's go back to the question, I asked just a moment ago. Why are so many people surprised? Well, let's review. And you remember I was talking about the peculiar business acumen of Donald Trump, right? So why are so many people surprised? Let's review, shall we? Trump steaks, gone. Trump shuttle, gone. Trump vodka, gone. Trump home furniture, gone. Trump fragrances, gone. Trump network, gone. Trump University, gone. Shut down after fraud litigation, Trump Foundation. Shut down after fraud litigation, Trump Castle, bankrupt. Trump Arena, bankrupt. Trump Plaza, bankrupt. Trump's World Fair, gone. Trump Taj Mahal, bankrupt. This isn't a list of isolated failures, as you can see. There are some people who have said, for this guy, bankruptcy is his business model. This is a pattern. And history teaches us that patterns are almost always more important than personalities.
More of Politics by Jake after this.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
Let's return to Jake.
Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And on Politics by Jake, I talk about things economic, I think things political, and I do this. The use of this is so that you can understand these things and position yourself accordingly. And I also do one-on-one strategy sessions for people who listen to this and think, gee, I would like something like this in my life. I do financial and wealth asset protection, and you can contact me. The link is in the description. You go to YouTube, Politics by Jake. You can find me there, and you can contact me and message me, and we can get together. Okay, so this having said, let me tell you where I think the reporters and, frankly, much of the political class go wrong on this. They keep treating Donald Trump as though he were an isolated phenomenon. And he isn't. And even as I sit here and I talk to you about this, because I know the end from the beginning. I know where I'm going with this. I want to tell you now, but we need to follow a pattern here. He isn't. History has produced, you'll excuse the expression, charismatic. I say charismatic leaders before. History has produced demagogues before. History has produced political movements centered almost entirely on one personality before. Every generation tells itself exactly the same story. Oh, it's all right, because it can't happen here. Upton Sinclair, a famous author in the 1930s, wrote a book about this. You know what the book was entitled? It Can't Happen Here. And well, those are dangerous words, aren't they? Not because America is doomed, not because history repeats itself mechanically, but because human beings have certain recurring tendencies. Technology changes, fashion changes, political parties change. Human nature, however, changes very slowly. And one of the great mistakes that people make is imagining that if liberty were ever seriously threatened in America, it would announce itself dramatically. Upton Sinclair said it would be wrapped in the flag and it would be carrying a Bible. Well, guess what? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. They imagine think tanks in the streets. They imagine frightening uniforms. They imagine enormous rallies and banners and symbols that make the danger obvious. History doesn't work that way. It doesn't start out that way. Anyway, I'll grant you that these things are becoming more and more evident, but they're becoming more and more evident because the people who are behind them think that they can't be stopped. And they're incrementally bringing themselves out more in the open. History advances, though, generally one exception at a time, one rationalization at a time, one compromise at a time, one sentence at a time, one executive action at a time. That's really how it did. One judicial opinion at a time, one election at a time, until eventually people wake up one morning and they discover that would have shocked them, that which would have shocked them 5 years ago. And now it seems like perfectly ordinary. That is why history matters. History doesn't, give us a script. It gives us patterns. Now, let me make another point here, okay? People often ask me why I spend so much time talking about history. Why do I go back, for example, into the 19th century? Why do I go back into the Roman Republic? Why do I talk about the Great Depression? For that matter, why do I talk about the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008? That's more recent history. Why do I keep dragging these old names into the conversation? It's because institutions, they have memories. Ideas have memories. Power has a memory. And if you don't know where today's institutions came from, you will almost certainly misunderstand what they're trying to accomplish tomorrow or, today. Now, let me also say something more that I think, is important here into consideration. On this program, I know I have listeners from, across the political spectrum. I see them in their comments all the time. Some of you are progressives. Some of you like what I say. Some of you are moderate Democrats, still with me. Some are Republicans. On some things, you like what I say, but, it's moving a little bit, not quite. Some are conservatives. And you know how I feel about conservatives, and I think there almost are no true conservatives, certainly not among the MAGA movement. Some are libertarians who I characterize as people who are willing to accept anything from the government as long as it's free and it doesn't require anything from them and it doesn't require them to put themselves out in any way. Those are my libertarian friends. And some are independents. And some of you disagree with me almost every week. And I say to this, good. I mean it, and I honestly mean it. You're welcome here, because the purpose of this program isn't to create an echo chamber, okay? It's to create an informed audience. We can disagree honestly, and we do. We can disagree vigorously, and we do. And I'm good with that. I'm a big boy. I can take it. Just as long as you keep on the conversation, just as long as you keep it to political aspects and the things we're talking about. But we ought to understand the facts that we're disagreeing about. And that brings me to something else. Donald Trump did not create this movement by himself. Like I enumerated all the peculiar business acumen of Donald Trump that I talked to you about, whereby he took a $413 million inheritance that he got from his father, and you could arguably say he squandered it, and probably the only thing that he learned from it was to use bankruptcy as a business model. And I ask you, is this someone that you want running the country? Is it? Because he's doing the same thing now. Anyway, Donald Trump did not create this movement by himself. No person ever does. Okay? Movements require organization. Okay? They require money. They require certain luminaries who are the head of certain groups, like Jamie Dimon. Putatively, maybe they didn't get together in a convention and nominate him and elect him. Putatively, the head of the billionaire class. They require institutions. They require people who spend years, sometimes decades, building structures that most of the public never notices. And, most people focus on elections here. You hear me say every week, or pretty much every week, this is the most consequential election, and it is. But I do have you, at the beginning of the show, I focus on the November elections. I do. And in November 2028, they'll be doing the same thing. So most people focus on elections. Historians, and I don't categorize myself as a historian really, but I am a student of it, and I am an avid student of it. Historians often focus on institutions. Why? Because institutions outlive elections. Presidents, they come, they go. Members of Congress, they come and they go. Television commentators come and go. Podcasters and radio commentators like yours truly, they come and they go. Like Shakespeare said, they strut their hour on the stage, a noise full of sound and fury, and then disappear and are heard from no more. Yeah. But institutions remain. And if you want to understand American politics over the next 20 or 30 years, don't just watch the personalities, watch the institutions. Because that's where the long game is played. And it's a game that's going on right now. And one institution in particular has quietly shaped the American judiciary for decades. Most Americans have never heard of it. Most Americans have never heard of the man who helped build it. But if you want to understand why the Supreme Court looks the way it does today, and you'll excuse the expression because I already said to you, I don't really believe that there are many. In other words, it's a vanishing breed. There are not many true conservatives in the Republican Party. There are not many true conservatives on the court. But they call it a conservative supermajority, 6-3. So, with that proviso, we could say conservative supermajority, but they're not. They're reactionary and they're even fascist. And I've talked about this, years ago on the show, and perhaps I will again. But if you want to understand why the Supreme Court looks the way it does today, why certain judicial philosophies have become dominant, why constitutional interpretation has shifted, then you need to know two names. The first is the Federalist Society, and the second is Leonard Leo. Let's talk about both.
We'll return to Jake in just a moment.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
And now, back to Jake.
Okay, Back to Politics by Jake. Here we are. And, Politics by Jake, what I do is I talk about economic and business realities, that political realities are going to help you stay positioned. If you want one-on-one, I do strategic consultations. You can check the link at Politics by Jake, youtube.com, and you will find that link there. Or you can contact me on social media, of which you've probably seen my clips. I'm on there for most days, most of the typical social media. You will find me at Politics by Jake, or Jake is on the air. And let's get together, let's connect, and let's have a discussion. I look forward to it. So now, getting back to what we were talking about, who is Leonard Leo? Do you know who he is? If I stopped 10 people, I mean, this is honestly, if I stopped 10 people on the street and I asked them that question, I don't think many people could answer it. And yet, if I asked those same 10 people whether the Supreme Court has changed dramatically over the last decade, almost all of them would say yes. And some would, make personal comments like, and that's good, it finally happened, they would say, or some would say, no, and it's terrible, but most of them would say yes. So let's connect those two ideas, shall we? Leonard Leo served for many years in a leadership role with the Federalist Society. Now, what is the Federalist Society? It's not a political party. It's not a government entity. It's not a government institution. Much like people used to argue about the Federal Reserve, at least initially, that it was a private institution. And it is an interesting, I don't want to, go too far down the garden path on that, because we're not talking about that now. But it does have interesting aspects to it. And previous to this, before they worked the bugs out, you could even make a stronger argument like that. But the Federal Society is not a political party. It's not a branch of the government. It's a legal organization. And it brings together judges, law professors, law students even, around a particular approach to constitutional interpretation. And honestly, it's radical. And I'm connecting it to Donald Trump, and I'm connecting it to all of these things. I'm connecting it to MAGA. Because if I just were to say, oh, it's a particular approach to constitutional interpretation, that's bland, that's banal, you're not going to get it that way. So I'm telling you, it's radical. It's radical. Whether you agree with that approach, or, disagree with it, that's not the point I'm making today. The point is that institutions matter. And for decades, the Federalist Society helped identify, mentor, and promote lawyers who shared its judicial philosophy. Now, that's not a weekend project. That's not a once a year or once a quarter webinar. That's not a seminar get together on a weekend, on the odd weekend in a year, in a given year. That's not an election cycle project. That's what I've been talking about on the show. It's a generational work. Not merely a generation. What's a generation? Approximately 20 years. This is more than a generation. This is multi-generation, generational work. And when Donald Trump became president, he inherited a list of judicial candidates that had largely been developed already through that network. Now, think about that for a moment, will you? Most Americans watched the confirmation hearings. Most Americans learned the names of the nominees. Very few people asked this question: who built the pipeline? Because, pipelines don't appear overnight. They take years to build, sometimes decades. Remember the word I used? Generational? That's why I keep telling you. That's why I have the focus. Pay attention to institutions rather than personalities. Personalities come and go. Shakespeare said it, strut their hour on the stage, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, and then they're gone. Pay attention to institutions. Now, let me take this one step further. In 2021, a businessman named Barry Said made what has been widely reported, and wait till you hear this, as the largest donation to a politically focused nonprofit in American history. The amount? $1.6 billion. Not million, not gazillion, but billion. And that's still a lot. A billion isn't much as a gazillion, but a billion is still a lot. And the recipient was an organization called the Marble Freedom Trust. Leonard Leo became associated with that trust. Now, stop and think what that means. $1.6 billion devoted to advancing a long-term political and legal vision. Whatever your politics, you would have to say, Jake, that's an extraordinary concentration of resources. And campaigns, they come and go. Candidates come and go, full of sound and fury, just like William Shakespeare said. But institutions funded on that scale, they can continue operating for years, perhaps even decades. And this is, one of the reasons why I keep asking you to distinguish between today's headlines and tomorrow's institutions. The headline is the election. That's the headline. But you've got to go further than that, or if you don't, please at least watch and listen to the show on the various platforms that it's offered on, KCAA and YouTube and Rumble and all the other ones. The institution, that's what remains after the election is over. Now, let me be very clear, okay? People can disagree, sometimes sharply, about whether the goals of the Federalist Society are beneficial or harmful. I absolutely think that they are harmful, but you have to consider the source. You know me. Many of you have watched me for years. You know the show. You know where I come down on this stuff. But we have to acknowledge, even if we have strong opinions, that's a legitimate political debate. I mean, that can happen. What is not really open to debate, though, is this. Organizations, donor networks, and legal movements have invested decades to shape the federal judiciary. And it's not just the Supreme Court, it's the lower courts as well in the federal jurisdiction. And if you're trying to understand why the courts look different today than they did 30 years ago, you have to understand those long-term efforts. And this is how institutional politics works. Slowly, patiently, often quietly. And by the time the general public notices, by the time they finally see the result through some case that takes away your freedom or makes you a slave or something like that, the work usually has already been underway for years. And that's the lesson I want to give you on this. History is often written by people you've never heard of, until suddenly Everybody is talking about the consequences of what they spent decades building. Leonard Leo is one example of that larger phenomenon. The real story isn't one individual. The real story is the architecture, the network, the institutions, the pipeline. You see? And once you begin looking at it, looking at politics through that particular lens, a lot of today's headlines start making a lot more sense.
We'll return to Jake in just a moment.
And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake.
This is Politics by Jake. Stay with us.
All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. Politics by Jake. I talk about political, economic things. I connect institutions. I talk about systems, and I do this so you can position yourself properly. If you like this kind of analysis, you'd like to apply it to your own personal, your business, financial situation, contact me. I do one-on-one strategy sessions. Contact me at Politics by Jake, youtube.com. And I'm on social media, either as Jake is on the air, Jake on the air, or at Politics by Jake. And contact me, personally message me, and we can connect, we can get together. It'll be a good conversation. I look forward to it. Now, that having said, we might entitle this segment that's coming up, Don't Follow, because I just spent, 10 or 15 minutes talking about it before. Don't follow personalities, okay? Follow institutions. One of the reasons I spend so much time talking about history is because history teaches us where to look. But most people look at personalities. I was just watching someone who was reciting some lines from the funeral speech in the play Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. I come here to bury Caesar, not to praise him. You know, this kind of thing. Brutus is an honorable man, this kind of thing. That's looking at personalities. That's what the crowd does. That's what the mob does. Historians look at institutions. Most people remember elections. Historians remember movements. Most people remember presidents. Historians ask, who trained these guys? Who advised them? Who funded them? Who recruited them? Who prepared the people that surrounded them? These are different questions, and they're usually they're the more important questions. Donald Trump is not the beginning of this story. I know a lot of you come, and I play into it because I like to have fun, and I like a good joke, even if it's sometimes at my expense. And I talk about people who run screaming, ripping the earbuds out of their ears, saying, "Oh my God, he's going to talk about Donald Trump again." But really, this is not how I feel. Donald Trump is not the beginning of the story. He's not even the middle of the story, okay? He's one chapter in a much longer history. And if Donald Trump disappeared from politics tomorrow, those institutions, that caused that he should be there. And I've said this before. He's a poster boy for the corporate and oligarchic and techno-oligarchic capture of America. He's a poster boy for that. And I talked to you about Jamie Dimon, who said we're all in for Trump. And I say, do you think that they didn't know their man already? This is already known. This wasn't a phenomenon. This wasn't something that was unexpected. It was totally contemplated. Totally contemplated. So tomorrow, those same institutions that put Donald Trump in that office, they would still exist. That's why institutions matter. Now, I want to make something very clear. Every major political tendency in American life builds institutions. Liberals do it. Conservatives do it. Libertarians do it. Labor unions do it. Business organizations do it. Religious organizations do it. Civil rights organizations do it. Environmental organizations do it. Are you getting the idea here? Organizations do it. And that isn't unusual, really. That's just politics. The interesting question is not whether institution exists. Okay, they do. The interesting question is, what ideas are they advancing? How are they advancing them? And who is funding them? And what effect have they had? Those are historical questions. Now, let me tell you why this matters. Because if all you ever do is watch cable news, you'll spend your life watching personalities, and you'll know who insulted who. You'll know who won the news cycle. You'll know today's outrage. You'll know who's sleeping with who. You know who insulted who. You'll know, tomorrow's outrage. Today's outrage, tomorrow's outrage. That's panem et circenses, bread and circuses. That's the modern version of it. The Romans knew it, and it's still being used today to distract. Divide et impera, divide and conquer. This is what it is. And 6 months later, you won't remember any of it. But meanwhile, those institutions, they keep working quietly, patiently, year after year. Sometimes decade after decade. And then one day, everybody suddenly notices the results and they ask, when did this happen? And the answer is, well, it didn't happen yesterday. It happened over 20 or 30 years. You just weren't looking in the right place. And that's why I keep asking you to change the question, will you? Don't ask who won today's argument. Ask who has been building institutions for the last generation. Don't ask who made today's headlines. That cooked up for you. That's why I call it the corporate controlled corrupt media. It's cooked up. Just like you were slinging hash. Who made today's headline? Better to ask who's shaping tomorrow's assumptions. That's where the real political struggle usually takes place. Now, let me go one step further, okay? People often tell me, Jake, you're always talking about history, man. And I say, yeah, I am. Because history is a laboratory of politics. You can't perform controlled experiments on civilizations. You can't build You can't do A/B testing. Have you heard about that? You test one version of it at the same time you're testing the other of it, and then you compare them. A/B testing. A lot of you guys who are involved in the internet, you understand that concept. You can't do that, at least not yet, with civilizations. You can't build two United States. And by the way, the thing that became the Federal Reserve Act, in 1908, thereabouts, there was the Aldrich Act, 1907, 1908. That was an example of A/B testing. So it's been around with us more than since the computer age. But when you look at them, and I know you're not going to look at it, but I've looked at them, they're virtually identical. The thing that became the Federal Reserve Act and the Aldrich Act was a stalking horse to try out the ideas of what became the Federal Reserve Act. Anyway, A/B testing, okay? You can't perform controlled experiments on civilizations. You can't build two United States. Try one policy here, try one there, one from column A, one from column B, and compare the results. History is an experiment. History is the experiment. History is evidence. History is the evidence. History is the laboratory. That's why you hear me go back to Rome all the time. And I go elsewhere too. That's why I keep going back to the Great Depression. That's why I keep going back to Bretton Woods, which I characterize expansively, I admit it, but I don't withhold it. I'm not sorry about it. That's my story, as you hear me say, and I'm sticking with it. It was the New Deal for the world, the Bretton Woods Agreement. And we'll probably be talking about that relatively soon. That's why I keep going back to the Constitution. Because the people who built this country knew history. And I think it's marvelous that they knew what they knew, considering the type of resources that they have, but they did. And they're imputed some kind of preternatural and unearthly or supernatural genius to them just because it was so hard. But bottom line, taking all that away, they knew history. Washington, he knew history. Jefferson knew history. Madison knew history. Lincoln very much knew history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew history. Churchill, don't get me started on that guy, but Churchill, they knew history. Whether they agreed with one another, that's another question. But they all understood something fundamental. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but human beings repeat themselves constantly. And that is why history remains the greatest teacher of politics ever devised. And if you learn to recognize recurring patterns of institutions, patterns of ideas, patterns of power, then you'll stop being surprised by events that seem to come out of nowhere. Because they didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of years of preparation, and as I said, sometimes decades of preparation that most people, they never saw it. And that's exactly why we do this program every week. Not to tell you what happened yesterday. I joke about it, John Oliver's HBO show Last Week Tonight. That's not the show that I'm doing. I'm not here like John Oliver, who I appreciate. I appreciate what he does. I'm not here to do what he does. I'm not here to tell you what happened yesterday or even last week, although sometimes it comes up if it's germane. Not generally. That's not what I'm here to do. But it's to help you understand what's happening tomorrow. That's why I talk about Politics by Jake. I talk about how you can position yourself. I talk about strategic one-on-one consultations, because you need to know this stuff. You need to protect yourself. to help you understand what's happening tomorrow. Now, we've talked about personalities. We've talked about patterns. We've talked about institutions. Now, I want to talk about, because we're leading up, we're going to take a break in a minute. I want to talk about something that almost never gets discussed on television. Time. Politics is fought on two battlefields. One is today's election. The other is the next generation. Most politicians, they think about November. Most in the electorate think about November. Institutions, they think about 20, 10, 20, 30 years from now. That is one of the reasons that institutions usually beat politicians. Politicians come and go, strut on the stage with their hour, sound and fury, William Shakespeare. Institutions, they remain. Now, let's go back to Leonard Leo. Whether you agree with his judicial philosophy or disagree with it, that's not the question I'm asking, really. The question I'm asking is this: what can we learn from the strategy? I mean, think about it. Suppose your goal is to change the Supreme Court. Do you start by running somebody for president? No, you don't do that. That comes much later. First, you cultivate lawyers, then law professors, then law students. You create journals. You create conferences. You build professional relationships. You identify promising young attorneys. You encourage judicial clerkships. You build a philosophy. You write articles. You hold seminars. You create institutions like the Federalist Society. And then 30 years later, people wake up and say, when did this happen? When did the courts change? Well, the answer is 30 years ago, because that's how institutions work. They don't think in election cycles, not in that way, they don't. They think in generations. Now, ask yourself another question. Why is it that television almost never covers this kind of thing? Because it's not dramatic. A conference isn't dramatic. A law review article, not dramatic. Some people like them. I like them. I was in the legal profession for 30 years. So, I mean, that accounts for me. Most people don't read those. A judicial seminar, not dramatic either. And a fellowship, that's not dramatic either. But 20 years later, those things become Supreme Court opinions. History has a very long fuse. Now, let me ask you another question, okay? How many of you had heard the name Leonard Leo 5 years ago? 10 years ago? 15 years ago? Probably not many. And yet he was there. He was working. He was organizing. He was building. He was recruiting. He was planning. And that's institutional politics. Now, here's the lesson. This isn't unique. Every successful long-term political movement eventually realizes the very same thing. Winning one election isn't enough. You have to, this is why they call Biden a placeholder. Some people do. I think he was actually one of the better presidents since FDR. Be that as it may, I've talked about that before. We'll talk about it again. You have to build, winning one election, that's not going to do it. It's not going to be enough. You have to build institutions. You have to educate people. And, you can educate them one way or you can educate them another. You can educate them for the Nazi Party or you can educate them for, liberal democracy. You have to develop future leaders. You have to have publications. You have to have think tanks, legal organizations. Do you see? Policy groups, research organizations, donor networks. The people who understand this are the ones that usually win. And the people who ignore it usually spend their lives reacting and saying, how did this happen? And that brings me back to something I said earlier. History is the study of continuity. What persists? What survives? What adapts? What keeps going long after the people who founded it are gone? Those are the questions that interest me because they explain the present. Not perfectly, nothing explains history perfectly. Human beings are too complicated for that. But they can explain it far better than simply asking, what happened today? Today's headline. That's often the least interesting part of history. The preparation. That's where the story usually is. And that's why I spent so much time talking about history, not because I enjoy living in the past. Quite contrary, I like the present, but because history is usually the best guide for the future. If you want to know where we're going, look carefully at what has been quietly built over the last 30 years. That is almost always more revealing than today's press conference. And once you begin seeing politics that way, you'll never watch the news the same way again. And this is Politics by Jake.